we're at Distributech 2023, one of the sponsors of these interviews, and these are interviews with thought leaders from around North America and the globe. Our sponsors are H2 Scan. H2 Scan is the leading sensor manufacturer for hydrogen sensing in a lot of different applications, in transformers, in battery room safety, in processes in safety, in industrial, and in the future hydrogen economy. So I want to thank our sponsors, and I want to thank all of our guests, and I hope you enjoy this interview. My next guest is Bidesh Kaur. Bidesh is the product manager for Sentient Energy or Sentient?
Sentient Energy.
Sentient Energy. So we're going to get into product management stuff because that's right now kind of exciting times. There's a lot going on. But first off, tell me a little bit about your background in the power industry. How long you been in it? How'd you get in it?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Alan, for having me here. I have been in the power industry since 2001, so just over 20 years now.
About the same time I've been in it.
Yes, and back in time, right out of college, I had no idea about the power industry. I was pushed into it in my first company and never looked back since then.
That's excellent.
So I've worked in companies that provides products and services from substation to metering.
Okay.
So I've worked with companies like Itron, the smart metering and grid edge stuff. I've worked with companies like SNC Electric, does heavy equipment in the distribution grid, and my latest last 4 years been a fantastic journey at Sentient Energy, and I'm responsible for their whole underground product portfolio, as well as the software platform.
Underground, so I love that. We got a lot to talk about with the underground portfolio. But first of all, when we were here last year and when we were at IEEE doing interviews and when we did them at RE+, the number one problem last year was supply chain issues. Everybody had them. They're not gone away. We are working on them. Everybody's got now, I think, a better grasp of it. But the problem that we have today is the dynamics of change. For instance, Bloomberg just announced that their prediction for the adoption of EV charging was way off. It's going to be 2.4 to 2.6x what they said it was. That's a lot of change. So there's a lot of new demand on utilities. There is they're going to maintain the old grid, which is aging, which supply chain issues. It takes sometimes 2.5 to 3 years to get transformers. And that's not the only problem. There's all kinds of problems. So there are all kinds of problems. The demands on the utility are greater than they've ever been. Maintain the grid, be reliable, be resilient, get ready for DER, make sure you're green, decarbon. I mean, we've never put that much pressure on them before. From your perspective, talk about all of those demand changes and a little bit about how that equates to your job in product management for Sentient.
Absolutely. You highlighted, two key things stood out as you were explaining this. Number one, like you said, the supply chain issue is not gone for us. It's going to stay here. The macroeconomics of it, the geopolitical situation of it, it's beyond any company's control, right? So leaving that aside, from the utility perspective, I think, the aging infrastructure paired up with the extreme weather conditions, I think has a very, very detrimental effect. Now, from our perspective, there's good news to it. If you look at
it's good news to Sentient because you get to fix it?
For us as together with the utilities and Sentient, right? So from utilities perspective, if you look at it, companies like FP&L, Florida Power and Light, they have actually proven that undergrounding improves reliability and resilience. So in the back-to-back storms last year, when the areas with overhead were down with power for several days, the areas with underground barely had any outages.
Really?
So what this means is other companies can look at this example and build a strategy towards undergrounding. And how this helps is if you're replacing your aged infrastructure overhead with underground, you're fixing the aging infrastructure problem. At the same time, you're also building resilience.
Exactly.
Now, how it helps, how Sentient can help with it is we have a vast portfolio of underground line sensors which covers your whole distribution grid,
Right.
from the feeder to the last mile on the lateral residential. So I think that brings in visibility that otherwise you wouldn't have for your underground network.
No, because it makes sense. I mean, especially in like even fire areas underground, because then, you don't create fires in California when you run underground. So it makes a lot of sense. There's a cost to undergrounding, right? What is the cost differential between overhead and undergrounding? I used to hear that it was about 4 times. Is that still the case or not?
Well, there's a difference. You cannot look at the cost of just undergrounding at once. You need to look at the total life cycle cost. So Sentient Energy is a partner member at PDI Square, Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative. It's a non-profit organization. We have done a lot of research and models where utilities can look at it and say, what's my total cost of ownership of undergrounding? It's not just the $200,000 or $1 million per mile of underground conversion, but imagine once you have undergrounded and there is a storm or a tornado, it's not getting those lines down 3 times in 10 years.
Right.
So you add that up, you add up the safety aspect of it, then it makes sense in most of the cases. Otherwise, PG&E wouldn't have gone for 10,000 miles of commitment.
And so one of the things, most utilities are state regulated, right? So they have to go to the state public service commission or whatever. And a lot of rate-based things are based on capital spending, right? So it would also make sense if you're trying to go to the state and say, hey, I'm spending this much capital. Is most of the cost of undergrounding covered by capital, or do they not also, like all of the excavation, all of that? Is that part of the package? Can they get a rate increase on that is what I'm asking.
Yes, absolutely, because you're improving your reliability of service. So as a customer myself for PG&E, the area I'm in is already undergrounded, but imagine, not losing power anymore when there is a high fire threat, and there are critical patients and those who need oxygen supplies. So I think it makes sense. Ratepayers wouldn't mind that increase over time,
Right.
as long as, of course, it has to be kind of vetted out with different parties.
Yeah.
But I think overall scheme of things, it does make sense.
So that is a great connection between what you do and the focus on reliability. At the same time, utilities are dealing with the hockey stick of demand curve, which they have not had to deal with in the last 15 years. Demand has been pretty, now we've had, hey, we got to do decarbonizing, but now we've got to, and so there's going to be competing priorities, right, for that. How do you address that when you say, which is the best? I mean, you're going to compete with people that say, let's just get as much power to as many people as we possibly can, forget about undergrounding. How do you answer those people to say, no, we are a solution that is going to be a long-term, better solution than short-term reactionary solutions?
Absolutely, great point. And I think the change in demand profile has immense impact on how you do your asset management strategy.
Ooh, talk about that.
Yes.
Talk about that. Okay.
So what it means is your typical duck curve doesn't exist anymore. Right? And here is why. We are pushing for more EVs. What that means is when you come back home from work, 5, 6 in the evening, you are plugging in the EV. So your load profile just increased dramatically. Let's say you don't plug in 6 p.m. and you have it programmed to run late at night.
Right.
The power consumption of an EV to fully charge is equivalent to a fully running home, which means your load didn't drop after midnight. It actually stayed at the same level because now, even though the lights are off, you're sleeping, your EV is charging, so it's still pulling the load. So how do you balance that? The typical grid, the traditional grid was planned for single directional power flow. If I pick a transformer, a 50 kVA transformer typically would have 7 customers behind it, was planned with a certain load. Now all of a sudden, all the 7 homes buying EVs, plugging it at the same time, that wasn't what it was planned for.
Right.
While transformers are, can operate at beyond its nameplate rating, you do not want to do it day over day, week after week, year after year. So that's where we come in as an end-to-end solution. So we have one of our newest product, UM1, which you probably have talked to us before, is it goes into transformer, it monitors for fault in your underground system, but also monitors for your loading of the transformer. So a case in point is one of our customers recently, we flagged them like they had the transformer overloaded 150 times over 8 months, and the peak loading was 212%. Average was 126%.
Yeah.
That's something you don't want. What action they are able to take? They are able to now, with this data, go and upgrade it before it fails to a 75 kVA transformer. Now, this is what we call data-driven asset management strategy. Don't just run to failure. Don't just wait for it to fail.
So given the fact that you're in product management, you have to be looking ahead at what's coming, what are the issues that the industry is facing that you're solving, right? So if you're listening, what are you hearing?
There are a couple of things that comes to mind. Number one, the utility companies, I feel for them because they are resource constrained, they have a ton of projects to work on, and they can only focus on so many things. So a solution to that is, as they are dealing with all these different software platforms and data points from all different kinds of devices, they need to look at more at what cloud capabilities that they can leverage, so that the in-house team doesn't need to focus on managing, doing the cookie cutter task of system management, but they can focus on how to optimize their business processes and have other vendors kind of take care of cloud-based solution and kind of deal with the data. And the second piece very linked to that is immense amount of data. Just having gigabytes and petabytes of data means nothing,
right,
unless it's actionable. Right. So I think one of the challenge, and that's the forward-looking thing I think needs to happen over the years, is what are the actionable insights? Don't just show me the data. Tell me in a nutshell, what action do I need to take today, 3 weeks from now, a month out, so that something that's likely to get impacted further along the line, I can delay and then I can prioritize my workforce.
One of the things, because you just talked about that, big data is, I know a utility that I spoke with recently mentioned that a utility hired more data scientists that year than they hired electrical engineers. And they said that was a first for them, which is kind of an indication of what you're saying. There's just going to be a huge need for people that help us, because the data scientist doesn't make a decision. They just create data that allows us to make the decision. And it's like the demand for electricity is doing this. The amount of data with all of these wired systems and wireless systems is doing that too. So that's a great point. Okay, so we're on an airplane. We're at 35,000 feet. You've told me a little bit about what you do here. As you and your company look forward, as you say, as a professional in the industry, let's assume that we mitigate the supply chain issues and we begin to really integrate DER into the whole network. So we are decarbonizing. We are putting more utility work underground so that we can create a much more resilient grid. And I do have another question for that one. But what do you think the storms are on the horizon that we ought to be looking at now that are going to be coming in 10 years, if we could predict them?
Well, that's a hard one. I hope I had the crystal ball, but yes, I think what we are looking at is we are thinking that just bringing in solar PV and EVs is going to decarbonize, but you still need to look at the variations those bring in. Oh, yeah. The sun is not shining 365 days a year at the same level, so you still need your traditional means of generation in place. Now, how do you balance that? How do you load balance all of that without impacting your service levels? The second thing is the challenges are, a lot of these product solutions work on their own. So I think, what the utilities would need to think of is, how do I minimize or optimize the information that I'm getting from all these systems? How do they work in an integrated fashion, right? All of a sudden, I don't want to jam my communication network with millions of devices out in the field. Can some of them talk to each other? So I think what we are looking forward is all different vendors like Sentient and other companies would need to partner together and have those devices talk to each other locally and make grid edge decisions. And what that means is open protocols and open communication, standardized communication mechanism and data exchange across devices.
Does that not increase the risk of cybersecurity when you have that?
Of course it does, but we do have the technology to make it cyber secure. You can have them all communicate within the utilities. Think of private LTE, right? A LTE network, private LTE is the utilities network. They can manage it. As long as all these devices talk within their network, that's absolutely fine.
Oh, excellent. Great point. So we've answered the 10-year down the road, we've answered things, but you said something that interests me. So EVs and EV charging, most of that is underground, right? You don't see overhead lines going
right.
So they've already adopted, the charging technology has adopted the fact that they're underground. But they haven't adopted a standardized approach to plug-ins. I mean, I rented an EV and I could not charge it at the Tesla charging station because my connector didn't work with the Tesla. And those are the kinds of things that push us backward, when we don't have the industry working together. So how does Sentient, how do you as a product manager work within the industry to do those open architecture, open protocols so that you can get, nobody has the solution. Everybody has a part of the solution, right? How do you do that? Where do you come together to create standardization of those kinds of things? Is there an organization you work within that you can say, hey, we get a lot of the work done here?
Yes and no. So there are organizations where things are very well defined. So going back, like DNP3 protocol is a very common protocol used for communicating across all these devices, right? That's just at the device level. However, how different systems interact. So for example, our analytics platform can ingest data from a completely unknown device. I think that's the kind of standardized interaction or integration that has to be placed. So we are thinking ahead in terms of building open application programming interfaces, which is called APIs, so that anybody can consume the data. So there is protocols like MQTT, which is a publish subscribe model. I was talking to a customer yesterday, a large IOU, and they're very excited to hear about that we are thinking along those lines where we publish a message, anybody within the secured network can actually subscribe to it. So I think we'll see more of those changes coming in down the road. And to your point about EVs, yes, that's absolutely, we want it to be like a gas station. Exactly how it works, right?
Yeah.
So I think, all these, specifically on the EV side of things, all these manufacturers have to go towards the standard.
Excellent, good. Well, Bidesh, thank you for joining us. It's been a delight, and I wish you good success at Sentient.
Thank you, Alan. Nice speaking to you.
This has been an APC Technologies production, and we thank you for joining us. Our sponsors have been H2Scan and Distributech. And of course, the communities of APC Technologies, which is Transform Technology, Power Systems Technology, Green Energy Technology, and Women in Power Systems. So thank you.